The recruitment hall of Nexus Prime buzzed with the nervous energy of 300 fresh cadets, and General Korthak surveyed them with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too many battles and buried too many soldiers. His massive Zephyrian frame cast a shadow across the front rows, 8 feet of battle-scarred muscle and bone that had earned its reputation in the Outer Rim conflicts. "Welcome to the Galactic Military Academy," he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of 40 years in service. "Most of you will wash out within the first cycle. The rest will either become warriors or casualties." The assembled recruits represented 17 different species from across the galaxy. Raxians with their chitinous armor and compound eyes, Ornites whose crystalline skin reflected the harsh station lighting, Eldons with their forearms and perpetual scowls, and scattered throughout the crowd like afterthoughts, the humans. Korthak had to suppress a snort of amusement every time he looked at them. Soft, pink creatures barely reaching his chest, with their ridiculous bilateral symmetry and those tiny, inadequate teeth. No natural weapons, no armor plating, no enhanced reflexes. The Galactic Council's decision to include Earth in the military alliance still baffled him. What could these fragile beings possibly contribute to the defense of civilized space? Combat readiness, he continued, pacing before the assembled cadets, is not merely about following orders or memorizing tactical manuals. It requires instinct, strength, and the will to survive when everything goes wrong. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the crowd, which it always does. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the alien cadets. The humans, Korthak noted, remained oddly silent. Probably paralyzed with fear, he mused. Now then, the general announced, rolling his massive shoulders until his joints cracked like gunshots, "Let me demonstrate what real combat looks like." Without warning, he spun toward the nearest training dummy, a reinforced plasteel construct designed to withstand Thornite strength levels. His fist connected with a sound like thunder, and the dummy's torso crumpled inward like paper. Several cadets jumped backward. A Keldon actually fell off his bench. Korthak turned back to his audience, not even breathing hard. That dummy was rated for 12,000 pounds of impact force. "I barely put effort into that strike." He flexed his clawed fingers, watching the cadets' expressions range from awe to terror. "The enemies you will face in the field will not show mercy because you are young, or scared, or unprepared. They will kill you without hesitation if you give them the chance." He began walking along the front row, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet hall. "The hegemony teaches its soldiers from birth. The consortium breeds warriors in artificial wombs. The Shadow Fleet recruits only the most vicious predators from Deathworlds across the spiral arm." His yellow eyes glittered with dark humor. "And here we are, trying to turn civilians into soldiers in a few short cycles." A Vraxian cadet raised one of his secondary arms. "Sir, what should we do if we encounter enemies with superior physical capabilities?" "Excellent question." Cadet Korthak squinted at his tablet. "Vorth. The answer is simple: you adapt, you overcome, or you die. There is no middle ground in warfare." He gestured toward the ruined training dummy. "Raw strength is only one tool in a warrior's arsenal, but it is a fundamental one. Without it, all the tactics and strategy in the galaxy become worthless." He stopped his pacing and faced the group directly. "Which brings me to today's practical demonstration. I need a volunteer to help illustrate proper combat stance and defensive positioning." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Even the most confident alien cadets suddenly found their boots fascinating to stare at. Korthak waited, enjoying their discomfort. Here was a useful teacher, after all. "Come now," he said with mock disappointment. "Surely one of you has the courage to face a tired old general in a controlled training environment?" He let his voice drop to a menacing whisper. "Or perhaps the Academy's standards have dropped even lower than I feared." That stung, as he intended. A few Thornite cadets straightened in their seats, their pride warring with their common sense. A massive Keldon in the third row actually started to rise before his companion pulled him back down. Then, from the human section near the back, came a clear voice, "I'll do it, sir." Korthak blinked in surprise. The voice belonged to a human female, barely 5.5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation knot. She stood calmly among her seated classmates, her hands at her sides, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Cadet Torres, don't," hissed another human beside her. "Are you insane?" But Maya Torres was already walking toward the front of the hall, her stride confident and unhurried. The other cadets watched her approach with expressions ranging from admiration to horror. Korthak found himself momentarily speechless. In all his years of training recruits, he had never seen such a display of either courage or stupidity. "Your name, cadet?" he asked, though he already knew from her uniform tag. "Maya Torres, sir. Third cycle, Terran Defense Corps, transfer. And you volunteer for this demonstration, knowing full well that I could break you in half without trying?" Maya's lips quirked upward in what might have been amusement. "With respect, sir, I think you might find that more difficult than you expect." The hall erupted in whispered conversations. Even Korthak felt his eyebrows rise. The sheer audacity of this tiny human was either inspiring or deeply concerning. "Very well, Cadet Torres," he said slowly. "Let us see what Earth's finest has to offer the Galactic Military." As Maya Torres walked toward the demonstration area, Korthak's mind raced through everything he knew about human physiology. Bone density roughly equivalent to a Keldan juvenile. Muscle mass that wouldn't impress a sedentary Thornite clerk. Reaction times adequate for civilian work, but laughably slow by military standards. The species had somehow managed to achieve spaceflight without developing any meaningful combat capabilities, which was either a miracle of engineering or the galaxy's most elaborate practical joke. He watched her approach with the detached interest of a scientist observing a particularly doomed lab specimen. Humans were famous throughout the galaxy for their bizarre tendency to attempt things that should kill them, usually with predictable results. Their homeworld's emergency medical services had apparently evolved specifically to deal with the constant stream of injuries caused by their species' inexplicable need to test the laws of physics through personal experimentation. Behind Maya, the other cadets were having their own reactions to this unexpected entertainment. Cadet Vorth clicked his mandibles in what Korthak recognized as Vraxian amusement. "Look at her walk," he whispered to his companion. "She actually thinks she has a chance against a Zephyrian war veteran." The Thornite cadets were less subtle in their derision. Their crystalline forms sparkled as they shook with barely contained laughter. "Should we call the medical bay now?" one asked loudly enough for half the hall to hear. "Save time later when they need to scrape her off the floor?" Even the normally stoic Keldans were exchanging glances of disbelief. Their four-armed physiology gave them natural advantages in grappling that humans could never match, and they knew it. One of them actually started pulling out his communication device, presumably to record what promised to be a very short and decisive demonstration. Captain Nexus, the Academy's chief training instructor, suddenly materialized at Korthak's elbow with the speed that only came from years of preventing cadets from accidentally killing themselves. His Keldan features were creased with concern as he watched Maya continue her approach. "General," he said in a low voice, "perhaps we should reconsider this demonstration. Humans are remarkably fragile compared to most galactic species. Even a light training exercise could result in serious injury." Korthak waved him off dismissively. "Nonsense, Captain. I'll barely touch her. Consider it a valuable lesson in knowing one's limitations." He raised his voice to address Maya directly. "Cadet Torres, are you certain you wish to proceed? There is no shame in acknowledging when you are outmatched." Maya had reached the center of the demonstration area and was now facing him across a distance of about 10 feet. She began stretching her arms and shoulders with fluid motions that suggested some kind of formal training, though Korthak couldn't imagine what human combat discipline could possibly prepare her for this encounter. "I appreciate the concern, sir," she replied with that same infuriating calm, "but I've been looking forward to testing some techniques I learned back home. We don't get many opportunities to spar with Zephyrian warriors on Earth." "Techniques?" Korthak couldn't help but chuckle. What techniques could possibly level the playing field between us? I outweigh you by at least 200 pounds, and my bone structure could stop projectile weapons. Maya shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to look both casual and ominous. My grandmother always said that size matters less than leverage. She taught me that every opponent, no matter how strong, has weak points if you know where to look. The betting had started in earnest now among the alien cadets. Korthak's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of hurried negotiations. Credits were changing hands at odds that heavily favored the outcome, lasting less than 30 seconds. A few of the more ambitious Vraxians were taking bets on whether Maya would remain conscious after the first contact. Captain Nexus made one more attempt at intervention. General, the liability forms alone for this demonstration could take weeks to process. Perhaps we could use a holographic simulation instead? Captain, Korthak said with growing amusement, I think you underestimate both my control and Cadet Torres's durability. Humans may be fragile, but they're not made of glass. He looked at Maya with something approaching fond condescension. Besides, practical experience is worth more than 1,000 simulations. Isn't that right, Cadet? Absolutely, sir, Maya agreed. She had finished her stretching routine and now stood in what appeared to be some kind of combat stance, though it looked nothing like any fighting form Korthak recognized. Her weight was distributed evenly on both feet, hands held loosely at her sides, posture relaxed but alert. The crowd had grown quieter now, sensing that the actual demonstration was about to begin. Even the betting had slowed as everyone focused on the mismatched pair in the center of the hall. The contrast between them was almost comical, Korthak's massive frame towering over Maya's compact human form like a mountain over a pebble. Very well then, Korthak announced, beginning to circle slowly around his volunteer. Let us begin with basic defensive positioning. I will attempt a simple grapple, and you will demonstrate proper evasion techniques. Remember, the goal is survival, not victory. Maya nodded, turning to keep him in sight as he moved. Understood, sir. Though I should mention that my grandmother also taught me that survival and victory are often the same thing. Korthak paused his circling, struck by something in her tone. For just a moment he almost thought he detected a note of confidence that went beyond mere bravado. But that was impossible. She was human. Captain Nexus, recognizing that his protests were falling on deaf ears, reluctantly activated the training ring's safety protocols. Energy barriers shimmered to life around the demonstration area, creating a contained space roughly 20 feet in diameter. Medical scanners hummed online, ready to detect the first sign of serious injury and automatically halt the exercise. Safety fields are active, Nexus announced with the weary tone of someone who had seen too many training accidents. Emergency medical protocols are standing by. General, the system will intervene if Cadet Torres's vital signs indicate distress. Korthak nodded absently, still studying his opponent. Maya had moved to the center of the ring and was bouncing lightly on her toes, a habit that struck him as oddly familiar. Where had he seen that movement before? Now then, Cadet Torres, he said, stepping into the ring with the casual confidence of someone who had never lost a training bout, and I want you to understand that I will be using perhaps 5% of my actual strength. This is purely educational. He held up one massive hand, claws retracted but still visible. In real combat, an enemy would show no such restraint. The assembled cadets had pressed against the viewing barriers, their earlier amusement replaced by morbid fascination. Even the most confident among them had to admit there was something surreal about watching a human voluntarily enter a combat ring with a Zephyrian general. Maya nodded politely. I understand, sir. Though you might want to consider using more than 5%. My training partners back home always said I was surprisingly difficult to catch. The casual way she said it sent a ripple of confused murmurs through the crowd. Cadet Vort's compound eyes swiveled as he tried to process what he had just heard. Did she just suggest that a Zephyrian general should try harder? He whispered to his companion. Korthak chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. Cadet, I appreciate your confidence, but I have been training warriors since before your species achieved interstellar flight. I think I can manage to restrain myself appropriately. If you say so, sir, Maya replied with that same infuriating calm. The general decided to end this quickly before the human's misplaced confidence led to actual injury. He would demonstrate a basic grappling technique, something gentle enough to avoid permanent damage, but decisive enough to illustrate the vast gulf between human and Zephyrian capabilities. Very well, he announced to the crowd. Watch carefully as I demonstrate a standard restraint hold. Notice how proper positioning and leverage can neutralize an opponent without causing unnecessary harm. He turned back to Maya. I'm going to reach for your right shoulder, Cadet. Your job is to attempt evasion. Maya shifted her stance slightly, and Korthak noticed her weight settling even lower, knees bent at what seemed like an uncomfortable angle. Her hands remained loose at her sides, but something about her posture reminded him of a coiled spring. Ready when you are, sir, she said. Korthak began his approach, moving with deliberate slowness to give Maya every possible chance to demonstrate whatever evasion techniques humans might possess. His right hand extended toward her shoulder in a grab that should have been easily readable to anyone with basic training. What happened next defied every calculation in his tactical database. Maya's response was not evasion. Instead, she stepped forward into his reach, her left hand snapping up to grip his extended wrist while her right hand found his elbow. The movement was so fluid, so perfectly timed, that Korthak barely registered it was happening. Then she pivoted. The world suddenly tilted as forces he didn't understand redirected his forward momentum in a direction his inner ear insisted was impossible. His massive frame, which had never failed him in decades of combat, became his enemy as his own weight and motion carried him inexorably toward the floor. The impact shook the entire platform. Korthak found himself staring at the ceiling, his right arm twisted at an angle that sent warnings through his nervous system. Maya Torres stood beside him, still holding his wrist and elbow in a grip that somehow commanded his entire body despite her fraction of his mass. The training hall had gone completely silent. Even the automated systems seemed stunned, their sensors struggling to process what had just occurred. The medical scanners were beeping in confusion, unable to determine whether they should be concerned about the general's condition or impressed by the cadet's technique. Captain Nexus stared at the scene with his forearms hanging limply at his sides. In 30 years of military instruction, he had never seen anything quite like what had just transpired. Cadet Vorth's mandibles had locked in the open position, producing a sound like air escaping from a damaged hull seal. The Thornite cadets had stopped sparkling entirely, their crystalline forms frozen in attitudes of complete bewilderment. Maya looked down at the prone general with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Are you all right, sir? I can release the hold if you're uncomfortable." Korthak stared up at her, his mind racing to process what had just occurred. According to every law of physics he understood, what this human had just done should have been impossible. He outweighed her by more than 2-to-1, had superior leverage, better positioning, and decades more experience. And yet here he was, flat on his back, completely controlled by a grip that felt as unbreakable as ship's plating. How he managed to croak, his voice carrying a note of wonder that the assembled cadets had never heard before. "In the name of the 7 moons did you do that?" What had just transpired in the training ring would be analyzed and reanalyzed by the Academy's tactical computers for weeks to come, but the alien cadets witnessing it firsthand experienced something far more immediate and disturbing than mere data. They had just watched their fundamental understanding of combat physics crumble in real time. From Cadet Vorth's perspective, the entire sequence had unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. His compound eyes, evolved for tracking multiple fast-moving objects simultaneously, had captured every microsecond of the exchange. At 0.1 seconds, General Korthak's massive hand had been extending toward Maya's shoulder in what any tactical manual would classify as a textbook restraint attempt. The human's positioning seemed suicidal, stepping forward into the grab rather than away from it. At 0.5 seconds, Maya's left hand had made contact with Korthak's wrist. Vorth's enhanced vision caught something that would haunt his dreams for cycles to come, the precise angle of her grip, the thumb and fingers positioned not for strength but for mechanical advantage. Her right hand simultaneously found the general's elbow, creating what his tactical database struggled to categorize. At 1.2 seconds, the pivot began. Maya's entire body became a fulcrum, her legs driving upward while her torso twisted in a motion that seemed to violate several laws of anatomy. Korthak's forward momentum, which should have carried him through any human resistance like a meteor through tissue paper, instead became the very force that doomed him. At 2.8 seconds, the general's feet left the ground. At 3.7 seconds, his massive frame impacted the platform with enough force to register on the station's seismic sensors. But at exactly 4.0 seconds, Maya Torres stood over the prone form of a Zephyrian war veteran, maintaining a joint lock that had transformed the galaxy's most feared military species into a study in helplessness. Captain Nexus, whose four-armed physiology gave him an intuitive understanding of leverage and grappling, found his worldview undergoing rapid and uncomfortable reconstruction. The technique Maya had just demonstrated wasn't just effective, it was elegant. She had used Korthak's own strength against him, turning his superior mass from an advantage into a liability. But that wasn't the part that terrified him. The part that terrified him was the casual precision with which she had executed it. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no apparent effort. She had moved like someone who had performed this exact sequence thousands of times before. The Thornite cadets were experiencing their own crisis of understanding. Their crystalline neural structures processed information through harmonic resonance, allowing them to perceive patterns and connections that other species missed. What they were seeing now was a pattern that shouldn't exist, a combat form that relied not on the crystalline perfection of overwhelming force, but on the organic fluidity of adaptive response. One of them, Cadet Zelex, managed to whisper. She used his weight as a weapon against him. How is that possible? The answer lay in biomechanics that their species had never needed to develop. Thornites were living tanks, relying on their natural armor and massive strength to overwhelm opponents. The concept of redirecting force rather than opposing it was as foreign to them as breathing water. But Korthak himself was experiencing the most profound revelation of all. Lying on the platform with his arm twisted in Maya's iron grip, he could feel the precise application of leverage that held him captive. Every attempt to resist only tightened the lock, his own strength becoming another tool in her arsenal. Release, he gasped, and Maya immediately complied, stepping back with that same fluid grace she had displayed throughout the encounter. Korthak rolled to his feet, flexing his right arm and trying to process what had just occurred. His tactical mind, honed by decades of warfare, began analyzing the technique from a professional perspective. The human had identified the exact moment when his forward momentum would be greatest, had positioned herself to intercept and redirect that energy, and had executed a throw that used his own mass as a multiplier for her leverage. It was, he realized with growing amazement, brilliant. But the demonstration wasn't over. Impressive, Cadet Torres, he said, though his tone had shifted from condescension to genuine respect. However, that was merely a throw. In actual combat, your opponent would not remain on the ground to be admired. Maya nodded seriously. You're absolutely right, sir. Shall we try again? The crowd of alien cadets buzzed with renewed anxiety. Surely the general wouldn't allow himself to be embarrassed twice? But Korthak was already resetting his stance, his professional curiosity overriding his bruised pride. This time, he announced, I will not be caught off guard by your unconventional techniques. He approached more cautiously now, his grab attempt faster and more decisive. Maya's response was different this time, a flowing sidestep that brought her inside his reach. Her hands found his wrist again, but the angle was wrong, the timing off. For a moment, it seemed as though Korthak's superior experience would prevail. Then Maya's grip shifted, her right hand sliding down to his fingers while her left maintained control of his wrist. The movement was so subtle that most of the watching cadets missed it entirely. Korthak certainly did. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the training hall like a gunshot. The general's roar of pain and surprise drowned out the collective gasp of 300 alien witnesses as his wrist folded at an angle that Zephyrian anatomy was never meant to achieve. Maya had released him immediately, stepping back with her hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. But the damage was done. General Korthak stood in the center of the ring, cradling his broken wrist and staring at the human cadet with an expression that combined pain, shock, and something that might have been awe. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the automated systems seemed to hold their breath, uncertain how to process what they had just recorded. Maya Torres, all 5 feet and 6 inches of supposedly fragile humanity, had just broken the wrist of a Zephyrian general in 4 seconds flat, and she looked genuinely apologetic about it. The Academy's medical bay had seen its share of training injuries over the years, but the sight of General Korthak having his wrist reconstructed by a medical drone while a human cadet sat nearby offering sincere apologies was decidedly unprecedented. The regeneration field hummed as it knitted Zephyrian bone back together, a process that would take roughly 2 hours and leave the general with a perfectly functional but thoroughly humbled appendage. "I really am sorry, sir," Maya said for the 7th time, her voice carrying genuine regret. "My grandmother always warned me about applying too much torque too quickly. I should have been more careful with the angle." Korthak studied her through pain-narrowed eyes, still trying to reconcile what had happened with everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. "Cadet Torres, that technique you used, where exactly did you learn it?" Maya brightened slightly, apparently relieved to move away from apologies and toward explanation. "Oh, that was just basic aikido, sir. Well, aikido with some jujitsu modifications my grandmother taught me. She learned it from her grandfather, who learned it from someone in old Japan back on Earth. It's been in my family for generations." Aikido, Korthak repeated slowly, as if the unfamiliar word might explode if pronounced incorrectly. "The way of harmonious spirit," Maya translated helpfully. "It's all about using an opponent's energy against them instead of trying to match force with force. Grandmother used to say that the strongest opponent is just the easiest one to throw, because they give you more momentum to work with." Captain Nexus, who had been monitoring the medical procedure with forearm deficiency, paused in his note-taking. "Are you saying this technique is common knowledge among humans?" Maya's laugh was musical and completely at odds with the devastation she had just demonstrated. "Common? Oh no, sir. Most humans never learn any martial arts at all. But there are probably a few million of us who practice various forms. Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, Karate, Taekwondo, boxing, wrestling." She began counting on her fingers. "Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, Krav Maga, Sistema, Capoeira." The list continued for 30 seconds before Korthak held up his uninjured hand. "Stop. You are telling me that your species has developed multiple distinct combat systems. It was developed and refined over thousands of years," Maya confirmed cheerfully. "Humans are really good at figuring out new ways to fight each other. It's sort of a hobby." The implications of this statement settled over the medical bay like a toxic cloud. Captain Nexus made a strangled sound that his translator rendered as profound existential distress. As if summoned by the mention of human combat prowess, 3 more human cadets appeared in the medical bay doorway. Word of the incident had apparently spread through the Academy's human contingent with impressive speed. Maya called out a stocky human male with arms like bridge cables. "Heard you broke the general's wrist. Nice work." "It was an accident, Jake," Maya protested. "I told you, I always apply too much pressure when I'm nervous." Jake Torres, presumably a relative, grinned at Korthak with the casual friendliness that humans seem to display regardless of circumstances. "Don't feel bad, General. Maya's been doing that since she was 12. Broke 3 of my ribs during a family barbecue once." A tall, lean human female stepped forward, her movement carrying the same fluid grace that Korthak was beginning to recognize as a warning sign. "I'm Sarah Chen, sir, Maya's roommate. I practice Northern Shaolin Kung Fu myself." A different philosophy from aikido, but similar results when properly applied. The third human, a compact man with scars on his knuckles that spoke of extensive training, nodded respectfully. Marcus Webb, General. Boxing and Krav Maga. Heard about your demonstration. Maya always was too gentle for her own good. Korthak stared at the assembled humans, his tactical mind frantically recalculating threat assessments. How many combat forms do humans possess? Hundreds? Sarah replied matter-of-factly. Maybe thousands if you count regional variations. Every culture on Earth developed its own fighting style. We've had a lot of practice at war. And all of you are trained in these martial arts? Marcus shrugged. Not all humans, but a significant percentage. It's considered good exercise and mental discipline. Plus, you never know when you might need to defend yourself. Captain Nexus was now frantically updating Academy protocols on his tablet, his four hands moving in a blur of stylus work. The implications for training, housing assignments, and recreational activities were staggering. If even a fraction of human cadets possessed combat skills comparable to what Maya had just demonstrated. Sir, Maya said, interrupting his calculations, if I may ask, what's the Academy's policy on humans teaching martial arts classes? I was thinking some of the other species might benefit from learning about leverage-based combat techniques. The medical drone finished its work and retracted, leaving Korthak with a fully functional wrist and a completely reorganized worldview. He flexed his fingers experimentally, marveling at the precision of alien medical technology and the casual lethality of human martial tradition. Cadet Torres, he said finally, I believe that policy is about to undergo significant revision. Through the medical bay's viewport, the stars of Nexus Prime gleamed with the same light they always had, but somehow the universe itself felt different now. Humanity had just announced its presence in galactic affairs, and the announcement had taken exactly 4 seconds to deliver. 6 months later, the Galactic Military Academy's most popular elective course was Human Combat Dynamics, taught by a rotating staff of human instructors, who seemed to possess an inexhaustible supply of techniques designed to make larger, stronger opponents question their life choices. General Korthak, whose wrist had healed perfectly but whose ego remained permanently adjusted, had become the program's most enthusiastic supporter. The hegemony's shock troops average 8 feet in height and can bench press a small shuttle, he explained to the latest batch of recruits, gesturing toward a holographic display showing human cadets casually dismantling opponents twice their size. The consortium's battle droids are designed to withstand direct artillery strikes. The Shadow Fleet employs warriors bred specifically for killing efficiency. He paused, watching a small human female demonstrate a technique that sent a massive Keldan cadet flying across the training mat with what appeared to be a gentle push. And then there are humans, he continued, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been pride, who looked at the galaxy's most dangerous predators and said, "Hold my beverage. I want to try something." The new recruits, a mix of species that now included a significantly higher percentage of humans, watched the demonstration with expressions ranging from fascination to terror. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about Earth's unexpected contribution to military science, and enrollment applications from human worlds had increased by 3,000%. Maya Torres, now wearing the insignia of a training instructor despite being technically still a cadet, approached Korthak after the session. "General, the Vraxian ambassador wants to know if we can teach their military the basics of joint manipulation techniques." Korthak chuckled, flexing his once broken wrist unconsciously. "Tell the ambassador that humans will be happy to share their knowledge. After all, the galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place." He looked out at the training floor, where representatives of 17 different species were learning that the universe's supposedly weakest sentients had spent millennia perfecting the art of making weakness irrelevant. The irony was not lost on him. In a galaxy where strength determined survival, humanity had achieved dominance by teaching everyone else that strength was optional. The Galactic Council's decision to include Earth in the military alliance was looking less like charity and more like the most strategically brilliant recruitment decision in recorded history. The galaxy's enemies were about to learn what Maya's grandmother had known all along. The most dangerous opponent is the one who doesn't need to be dangerous. As the training session continued, Korthak found himself wondering what other surprises humanity might have in store for the universe. Given their track record, he suspected the answer would be both terrifying and absolutely fascinating. The stars outside Nexus Prime continued their eternal dance, but now they seemed to twinkle with something that might have been amusement. Somewhere in the vastness of space, enemies of the Galactic Alliance were about to discover that Earth's children had arrived, and they brought thousands of years of creative violence with them. The universe, Korthak reflected, was about to become a much more educational place.